90 minutes. That's how long they kept him waiting until the CEO walked in and turned the situation on its head. The sliding glass doors of Highland Crest Bank parted, releasing a stream of crisp, conditioned air that drifted out onto the street. The distinct aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the subtle scent of leather polish, giving the space an ambience of composed efficiency. Dorian Bennett entered, loosening his shoulders beneath the fitted cut of his blazer. He wasn't anxious. He'd stepped into too many boardrooms, closed enough deals, and built more than most to question whether he deserved a seat at the table. What he needed was for them to recognize it. His meeting had been scheduled for precisely 11:00 a.m. There was no reason to anticipate anything less than courtesy. The bank's entrance hall was a deliberate blend of sleek sophistication and classic prestige. Polished mahogany desks, clear glass dividers, and subtle gold details that caught the sun just enough to remind visitors that wealth lived here. It was a space designed to make an impression. At the front desk sat a woman, hair pinned into a flawless bun, expression unreadable. Her nameplate read Melissa. "Welcome to Highland Crest Bank," she said, tone practiced and efficient. "Do you have an appointment, Dorian Bennett?" He replied, placing a well-worn leather portfolio on the counter. "I'm meeting with Linda Kramer, 11 o'clock. Melissa tapped at her keyboard without looking up, eyes scanning the screen. "You're on the list," she confirmed, her voice as even as before. "Please have a seat. She'll be with you shortly." Dorian gave a courteous nod and made his way toward the lounge area. He selected a chair by the large windows, where beams of sunlight stretched across the shining floor in sharp geometric patterns. Nearby, a handful of professionals in tailored suits gathered near the phones, talking market trends and asset performance, the kind of relaxed, confident chatter that only came from those who knew they belonged. He tapped his fingers softly against his briefcase. 10:00 a.m. He was early, he always was. Minutes slipped by. 11:05, 11:15. At first, he dismissed the delay. Even banks experienced scheduling hiccups. But after 20 minutes, his attention turned to the rhythm of the lobby, who was coming, who was being greeted, and who was being brought back, and who, like him, wasn't. A man dressed in a gray suit, early 30s, perhaps spoke briefly with Melissa at the front desk. Less than 5 minutes later, a young banker emerged and guided him beyond the frosted glass doors that led to the executive suite. Soon after, a woman in a cream blazer arrived. From what Dorian could tell, she didn't have an appointment. Just a warm, familiar exchange with Melissa before she too was invited inside. Still, his name remained unspoken. He glanced down at his watch again. 11:30 a.m. Something didn't feel right. Dorian's fingers tapped gently on the edge of his briefcase as he watched the steady stream of arrivals. Some came through the door with the ease of people who knew they were expected, offering relaxed smiles, exchanging nods and handshakes with the staff. Others, like himself, waited quietly, but there was a key difference. Those others were being called in. He was not. He had been seated for 35 minutes. The meeting had been scheduled. He had confirmed it twice, yet here he was, still in the same seat, while no fewer than 6 people who'd arrived after him had been taken past those same frosted doors. Even so, he kept his composure. He had encountered this kind of treatment before, subtle, unspoken barriers that were easy to dismiss or explain away. "Oh, we didn't mean to overlook you. There must have been a scheduling error. So sorry, things get so busy around here." Excuses cloaked in courtesy. He stood, expression unreadable, and returned to the reception desk. Melissa glanced up, her face as unreadable as ever. "Pardon me," Dorian said, his voice controlled and clear. "Has Linda Kramer been informed that I'm waiting?" Melissa let out a slight sigh, as though he had interrupted her train of thought. She resumed typing on her keyboard without even meeting his eyes. She's aware. She's just finishing up with another client. Dorian waited, hoping for more, perhaps an updated wait time, or a sign that she would follow up again. But Melissa returned her focus to her screen, offering nothing more. "Could you give me an estimate on when she might be available?" he asked, reining in his irritation. Melissa barely looked at the monitor before shrugging. "Shouldn't be too long." Dorian took a slow breath, steadying himself. It wasn't just the words she chose, it was the way she delivered them. No sense of urgency. No genuine attempt to follow up. Just another hollow reply meant to smooth things over and move along. Then, right before his eyes, it happened again. A woman in a navy dress entered, a designer handbag swaying effortlessly at her side. She was mid-conversation on her phone, her voice light and casual. Melissa's demeanor shifted instantly. Her expression warmed, her tone softened, her lips curled into something that actually resembled a real smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Lancaster," she greeted, her voice bright and well practiced. The woman nodded politely. Within seconds, a young banker appeared and led her toward the executive suites. No delay. No clarification needed. No vague assurances about soon. Dorian exhaled slowly. He had been waiting for nearly an hour. She had been in the lobby for less than 60 seconds. He turned back toward Melissa. "So, are appointments honored here, or is this more of a first come, first served arrangement?" For the first time, Melissa seemed slightly uneasy. "I told you, sir," she said, her voice less certain now. "She'll be with you shortly." There it was again, that word, soon. A delay, disguised as reassurance, a promise with no follow-through, a way for people to pretend they weren't actively doing what they were doing. Dorian looked back toward the frosted glass doors. It would have been easy to stay quiet, to sit down and wait another half-hour, to pretend none of this was happening, but it wasn't just about the waiting anymore. It was something much deeper. He returned to his seat, steadied his breathing, reminding himself to stay composed. He'd faced greater challenges building a company from the ground up, pitching to skeptical investors, being underestimated by rooms full of overconfident men. But this wasn't about strategy or metrics. This was about being unseen, dismissed, treated as if he didn't even warrant an update. He checked his watch. 12:05 p.m. Over an hour had passed. He inhaled deeply, his eyes scanning the lobby once more. No one else was left waiting. Every single person who had arrived after him had already been taken inside. Everyone had either been escorted inside or at least acknowledged except for him. Across the lobby, a young teller chatted with an older man dressed in khakis and a golf shirt. Their exchange was relaxed, light, almost breezy. Dorian tilted his head slightly, listening. "Yeah, I told her to just walk in," the older man said with a chuckle. "She doesn't even need an appointment. You know how it is." The teller grinned. "Oh, for Mrs. Lancaster, we always make exceptions." Dorian's grip tightened around his briefcase handle. So that was the system. One set of rules for some, a different set for others. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the glossy floor beneath his shoes. This was a moment of decision. Would he remain silent, accept being overlooked, and keep waiting for someone to grant him visibility? Or would he make it clear that his time held equal worth to anyone else's? He rose, not in a hurry, not in anger, with purpose. He passed the front desk, ignoring Melissa's unchanged, detached expression, and walked straight toward the frosted glass doors. "Sir," Melissa called after him, but he didn't pause. He opened the door. A hallway unfolded before him, flanked by private offices on either side. Some had open doors, others were shut. One thing became obvious immediately. Linda Kramer wasn't in a meeting. She was at her desk, alone, typing on a laptop. She looked up, her face shifting from momentary surprise to a subtle flash of annoyance. "Mr. Bennett," she said crisply, "you were supposed to wait until you were called." Dorian met her eyes without flinching. I did wait. Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard, her mouth thinned into a tight line. Please, take a seat, she said at last. Dorian sat down not because she told him to, but because he chose to. Still, something in his gut told him this conversation wasn't going to follow her expectations. Linda subtly adjusted the papers on her desk, trying to maintain a composed expression. But he saw a flicker of tension in her jaw, a spark of irritation in her stare. I'm sorry for the wait, she said, forcing a polite smile. It's been a very busy day. Busy. Dorian repeated the word, letting it settle in the room like a weight. He had seen at least 6 people ushered in ahead of him, treated like VIP, while he remained seated in that lobby for more than 90 minutes. Were you? He asked, his voice composed but firm. Because I noticed a few individuals who didn't wait at all. Some didn't even appear to have appointments. Linda's lips tightened into a narrow line. I assure you, Mr. Bennett, she said, there was no intention behind that. It must have been some sort of mix-up. A mix-up, Dorian repeated, exhaling through his nose, his expression carefully unreadable. Interesting. Linda cleared her throat, clearly hoping to move the conversation forward. She opened a folder and began flipping through it, eyes scanning the pages. Let's talk about your loan application, she said, her voice once again polished, but now edged with subtle detachment. I've reviewed your submission, and while your financials are strong, our approval process is especially strict right now. Given the current lending environment, we'll need additional assurances before we can proceed. She barely finished her sentence when the door behind Dorian swung open. The entire mood of the room shifted. The hallway that had been quiet seconds earlier now echoed with the steady murmur of voices. Not just any voices, these were deliberate, commanding. 3 men entered, all dressed in expertly cut suits. Their presence carried unmistakable authority. Dorian didn't need introductions, he knew exactly who they were. These were the real power players at the bank, the executives, the ones whose opinions actually shaped decisions. And leading them was a familiar figure, Richard Langford, CEO of Highland Crest Bank, a man who absolutely knew who Dorian was. Richard's sharp gaze scanned the room until it found Dorian. Recognition sparked immediately. Dorian, he said with enthusiasm, breaking into a wide smile. What the hell are you doing here? Linda froze. Dorian rose from his chair and shook Richard's hand with confidence. Hey, Richard, it's been a while. It sure has, Richard replied, clapping Dorian on the shoulder. You still heading up Bennett's strategies? Still growing it? Dorian answered smoothly. Linda watched them, stunned, her hand tightening slightly around the folder in front of her. Richard turned toward her, the friendliness fading from his face. How long has Dorian been waiting? He asked. Silence followed. Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Dorian didn't respond right away either. He let the question hang there, its weight settling over the entire room. About 90 minutes, he finally replied. Richard's expression didn't shift dramatically, but Dorian noticed the faint clench in his jaw. An hour and a half, Richard echoed, his voice deceptively casual. You made Dorian Bennett wait for over an hour. Linda scrambled for an explanation. There was a scheduling issue, but Richard didn't even glance her way. His focus remained on Dorian. You should have called me directly, he said. I'd have ensured you were seen immediately. Dorian offered a small, knowing smile. Didn't think I needed to. Richard exhaled, shaking his head slightly. He turned to Linda, the smile now completely gone. Linda, he said, his tone calm but resolute, step outside for a moment. Linda's complexion lost some color. Her hands balled into fists before she forced herself to relax them. Of course, she muttered, quickly rising and walking out without protest. As the door clicked shut behind her, Richard turned back to Dorian. I don't know what that was, he said, but I can promise it won't happen again. Dorian didn't respond immediately. He didn't have to. The damage had already been done. Even with Linda gone, the tension in the room didn't ease. Richard let out a long breath and took the seat across from Dorian. The two other executives remained standing, exchanging glances but remaining silent. "This isn't how we operate," Richard finally said, his voice level, but with an edge. Dorian tilted his head slightly. "Looks like it is." Richard let that comment linger in the air. He didn't defend it, didn't try to justify what had happened. He didn't need to. Men like him, those at the top, could sense when something serious had just occurred. And now, Richard was mentally calculating how much fallout this moment might cause. Dorian wasn't just some random client. He was someone who had built a $1 million consulting business from scratch, and his name held influence in the professional world. Dorian was well connected. People trusted his judgment. And now he had something else, a story to tell. Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together. "Walk me through what happened." Dorian didn't hold back. He laid out everything: the scheduled meeting, the lengthy wait, the string of others escorted in before him. He detailed Melissa's dismissiveness, Linda's cold reception, how she treated him like a random name in a queue. Richard didn't interrupt, and the two executives standing by absorbed every word. When Dorian finished, a heavy silence settled in the room. Then Richard exhaled slowly. "Thank you for being honest," he said, "and to be completely transparent, I'm angry." Dorian leaned back slightly. "Why?" Richard let out a sharp, mirthless laugh. "Because things like this ruin reputations. We've spent years building this bank's name, its integrity, and now I'm left cleaning up a mess I didn't even know existed until 10 minutes ago." He turned to one of the executives. "Pull Linda off the floor immediately. We'll deal with this later." The man gave a brief nod and stepped out. Richard's attention returned to Dorian. "That loan application, I assume it's solid." Dorian tapped the side of his briefcase. "Take a look." Richard opened the folder and skimmed the contents. He didn't get far before shaking his head. This should have been approved without hesitation. He looked at the remaining executive. "Put this on a fast track. I want final approval on my desk before the day's over." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "That's simple." Richard met his eyes. "You should have had the approval 2 hours ago. I'm correcting the error." Dorian took a moment. He knew this wasn't generosity. It wasn't about fairness. This was about control, damage control. It was about containing the situation, making sure the fallout didn't spread beyond the confines of this office. And Dorian, he was more familiar with this game than most. Still, he wasn't about to let Richard off the hook so easily. "I'll take the approval," he said as he stood, "but making this right for me doesn't fix the larger problem." Richard's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes. "We're going to have a serious conversation about this," he said. Dorian picked up his briefcase, gave a single nod, and turned toward the exit. But before walking out, he locked eyes with Melissa one final time. She didn't look nearly as sure of herself now. The summer heat hit him the moment he stepped outside. The exterior of the bank shimmered under the midday sun, flawless on the outside. But inside, the fractures had already begun to show. This wasn't really about the loan, and it wasn't just about Linda either. It pointed to something broader, something that had repeated itself in countless forms across countless places. It wasn't always loud or obvious, but it was always there, the quiet assumption that certain people deserved to be welcomed in while others had to prove they belonged. The subtle brush-offs, the overly courteous refusals, the invisible hurdles wrapped in excuses, things you couldn't always call out, but always recognized. Not this time. Today, someone had to answer for it. And next time Linda Kramer scanned her appointment list, she'd likely pause, think a little harder. Dorian glanced down at his phone. A new email had landed in his inbox, loan approved. He smiled faintly, slipping the device into his pocket as he made his way to his car. Respect isn't handed out. You earn it or you demand it. And today, he made sure he got what he came for. If you've ever found yourself in a moment like this, made to feel that your presence, your time, or your business didn't matter, don't stay silent. Don't wait for someone to grant you space. Claim it. Pull out your chair. And if they try to leave you waiting, make sure they remember why that was a mistake.